The war between humans and the Drex had raged for years, each side claiming brutal victories and suffering devastating losses. Commander Kalira, one of the Drex's most feared warriors, had fought on countless battlefields, her name whispered with both awe and fear. But now, she sat in the cold, dimly lit cell of a human outpost, her hands bound and her body aching from injuries sustained during her capture. The metal walls of the cell hummed faintly with energy, and the only light came from a single flickering bulb overhead. Kalira's sharp, violet eyes scanned her surroundings, looking for weaknesses, for a way out. Her people didn't surrender, and they certainly didn't beg. If she was to die here, she would face it with her head held high. The door hissed open, and Kalira tensed. A human man stepped inside. His armor dusty but intact, his face calm but weary. He wasn't what she expected. His brown eyes lacked the cold cruelty she had come to associate with humans, and his movements were deliberate but not threatening. "I'm Captain Daniel Reyes," he said, his voice steady but not unkind. He placed a tray of food and water on the small table in the corner of the cell. "Thought you might be hungry." Kalira narrowed her eyes, her voice sharp. "I don't need your pity, human." Daniel sighed, leaning against the wall. "It's not pity. It's food. You can eat it or not. It's your choice." Kalira's stomach growled, betraying her hunger, but she refused to move. "What do you want from me?" Interrogation. "Torture." Daniel shook his head. "No torture, and I'm not here to interrogate you. My orders are to keep you alive. That's all." She snorted, her tail flicking behind her in frustration. Alive for what? To be paraded as a trophy, or bait for my people? He didn't flinch at her accusations, meeting her gaze evenly. "I don't agree with everything my side does, but I'm not the enemy you think I am." Kalira studied him, trying to find the hidden malice, the cruelty she knew humans were capable of. But his expression remained sincere, his posture relaxed. It was unsettling. "You expect me to believe that?" "I don't expect anything," Daniel replied, his voice softening. "But you're injured and trapped here. The least I can do is treat you like a person, not an animal." Her sharp eyes flicked to the tray, and despite herself, she felt a flicker of curiosity. She had expected hatred, violence, and pain, not this strange, disarming kindness. She hated how it made her feel. "Eat," Daniel said, stepping toward the door. "I'll be back later to check on you." As the door slid shut behind him, Kalira stared at the untouched food. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar creeping into her chest. Doubt. Was this human truly different, or was this all part of a cruel game? Kalira sat in the corner of her cell, her sharp eyes fixed on the untouched tray of food. Hunger gnawed at her, but her pride kept her still. The humans had taken everything, her freedom, her weapon, and her squad. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her as weak. The sound of the cell door hissing open broke her thoughts. Captain Daniel Reyes entered again, carrying a medkit. He glanced at the untouched tray and let out a small sigh. "Still not hungry?" he asked, setting the medkit on the table. Kalira's tail flicked in irritation. "I don't need your scraps, human." Daniel shrugged, kneeling to open the medkit. "Suit yourself, but those injuries won't heal on their own." He gestured to the gash on her arm, dried blood crusting around it. "Let me take care of that." Kalira stiffened. "Do you think I'll let you touch me? Your kindness is a trick, like all your species' schemes." Daniel met her glare with calm eyes. "If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have brought bandages." She hesitated, watching as he pulled out antiseptic and gauze. His movements were slow, careful, almost respectful. It was the first time she had seen a human act without hostility. Against her better judgment, she extended her arm slightly, her voice sharp. "Fine, but if you try anything, you'll kill me," Daniel finished, smirking faintly. "Got it." He worked in silence, cleaning and dressing her wound. His touch was firm, but not rough. And for a moment, Kalira found herself studying him. There was no malice in his expression, no smirk of triumph or hint of mockery. He worked as though she were no different from one of his own. "You confuse me," she said finally, her voice quieter than she intended. Daniel glanced at her, tying off the bandage. "How so?" "You speak of peace while your people wage war. You treat me with care, yet your kind destroys without thought. What do you want from me, human?" Daniel sat back, his expression thoughtful. "I can't speak for all humans," he admitted. "Some fight out of hate or greed. Yeah, but not all of us are like that. Me? I'm just trying to survive this mess and hold on to what's left of my humanity." Kalira frowned, his words stirring something unfamiliar within her. "And you think treating an enemy kindly makes you human?" Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile. "Kindness isn't weakness, Commander. Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps us from becoming the monsters we fight." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Kalira didn't know how to respond. For so long, she had seen humans as mindless destroyers, but this one, he was different. She hated how much she wanted to believe him. As Daniel stood and packed up the medkit, he glanced at her again. "The food's still there if you change your mind. I'll be back later." When the door slid shut, Kalira stared at the tray again, the faintest flicker of doubt in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, this human wasn't her enemy after all. Kalira leaned against the cold metal wall of her cell, her sharp claws idly tapping on the floor. The untouched tray of food sat nearby, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The human captain, Daniel Reyes, puzzled her. No matter how much she wanted to dismiss his kindness as a tactic, she couldn't deny how different he seemed from the others she had encountered on the battlefield. The hiss of the sliding door broke her thoughts. Daniel stepped in, carrying a small device in one hand and a steaming cup in the other. "Morning," he said, his tone casual, as if they weren't enemies on opposite sides of a war. Kalira's eyes narrowed. "You return, still pretending to be a kind captor." He raised an eyebrow, setting the cup on the small table. "No pretending here. Figured you might want something warm. Tea. It's not Drexian luxury, but it's good." She stared at the cup suspiciously, its faint herbal aroma unfamiliar but oddly pleasant. "Do you always bring your prisoners drinks, or is this part of some human game?" Daniel sighed, pulling up a chair to sit across from her. "You've made it clear you think everything I do is a trick. If it helps, think of it as my way of being a decent person." Kalira huffed, her tail flicking behind her. "Decent. Decency and war do not mix." "Not usually," he admitted, "but that doesn't mean we can't try. Look, I know you don't trust me, and I don't blame you. If the roles were reversed, I'd probably feel the same." She tilted her head, her sharp eyes scrutinizing him. "Why then? Why treat me as anything more than a prisoner?" Daniel leaned back, folding his arms. "Because you're not just a prisoner. You're a person, a commander, someone who probably has people depending on them. And because maybe, just maybe, if we treat each other like people, this whole mess of a war doesn't have to get worse." Kalira blinked, momentarily caught off guard. His words didn't carry the rehearsed tone of diplomacy she was used to hearing from humans. They felt real, but she couldn't let her guard down. "Knave," she said, though her voice lacked its usual edge. "Maybe," Daniel replied with a shrug. "But I'd rather be knave than lose what makes us human, or Drexian, in your case." She looked away, her claws tapping faster against the floor. His honesty unsettled her, stirring emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "Your words are strange, human." "Strange can be good," he said with a faint smile. "It's how we learn." Before she could respond, his communicator buzzed. "Rise, report to the command center immediately." Daniel sighed, standing and brushing off his uniform. "To be calls. Think about what I said, Kalira. You might find we're not as different as you think." As the door hissed shut, Kalira stared at the cup of tea. For the first time, she wondered if this human wasn't her enemy, but something entirely unexpected. An ally in a world full of chaos. The hum of the cell's energy field was the only sound as Kalira sat cross-legged on the floor, her tail swishing lazily behind her. The tea Daniel had left sat untouched, its warmth fading. She hated the questions his words stirred in her mind, questions about humanity, the war, and herself. The door hissed open, and Daniel entered, his steps heavier than usual. His face was grim, a stark contrast to the calm demeanor she'd grown accustomed to. He carried a small datapad and hesitated before sitting down across from her. "What is it?" Kalira asked, her sharp eyes narrowing. "You look as though your world is falling apart." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "Something's come up. Command wants to move you to another facility. They think keeping you here puts this outpost at risk." Kalira snorted, her violet eyes gleaming with suspicion. "Convenient. And what happens when I'm moved?" "Interrogation. Torture. Execution." "That's not going to happen," Daniel said firmly. "Not while I'm here." She leaned forward, her claws resting lightly on the floor. "You speak as if you have power over your superiors, but you're just a soldier. What can you do to stop them?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I know what you're thinking, that this is a trap, that I've been lying to you. But I swear to you, Kalira, my only goal is to keep you safe." Kalira's gaze flickered with uncertainty, her sharp mind weighing his words. "And why would you do that? What do you gain by protecting me?" Daniel sighed. "Because if we can't find a way to stop treating each other like enemies, this war will never end. I'm tired of seeing good people, on both sides, destroyed for reasons that barely make sense anymore." Kalira's tail stilled, and for a moment, the tension between them softened. But before she could reply, the communicator on Daniel's wrist buzzed. He glanced at it, his jaw tightening. "Stay here. I'll be back." "Where else would I go?" Kalira said dryly, but her gaze lingered on him as he left. Alone again, Kalira's thoughts churned. Could she trust this human? His actions were unlike anything she had seen in her years as a warrior. Kindness, compassion, these were not traits she associated with his kind. Yet Daniel's words struck a chord deep within her. Suddenly, the low murmur of voices reached her sharp ears. She moved closer to the door, her acute hearing picking up snippets of conversation from outside. "She's dangerous. Why haven't we just dealt with her already? That's not our call. Reyes seems to think. I don't care what Reyes thinks. If she escapes, it's on all of us." Kalira's claws dug into the floor. The voices confirmed her worst fears. Perhaps Daniel wasn't like the others, but not everyone shared his restraint. Her survival hinged on his resolve, and for the first time, she wondered if trusting him might be her only option. Kalira paced the confines of her cell, her sharp claws clicking softly against the cold metal floor. The overheard conversation played on a loop in her mind. She had no illusions about her captors. Most humans would rather see her dead than alive. But Captain Daniel Reyes had been different. His actions confused her, stirred feelings she couldn't afford in a time of war. The door slid open, and Daniel entered, his expression strained. He carried a small device under his arm, and his usually steady movements were quicker, more deliberate. "What's wrong, human?" Kalira asked, her tone sharper than intended. Daniel set the device on the table and exhaled deeply. "Things are heating up. Command wants to move you tonight." Kalira's tail flicked in irritation. And what does move mean in human terms? A new cage, or perhaps an execution disguised as a transfer? His jaw tightened, and for the first time, she saw frustration in his eyes. "It's not like that. I told you, as long as I'm here, no one's going to hurt you." She crossed her arms, her violet eyes narrowing. "Words mean nothing when surrounded by those who despise me. You are a single soldier. What makes you think you can stop them?" Daniel leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "Because I have a plan." Kalira arched an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. A plan. He nodded, pulling out a small holographic map from the device on the table. There's an old supply route near this outpost, off the grid, rarely monitored. I'm going to take you there and make sure you're safe until things settle. Kalira stared at him, her mind racing. This human, a soldier of the enemy, was risking his life to protect her. You would betray your own kind for me. It's not about betrayal, Daniel said, meeting her gaze. It's about doing what's right. This war's already taken too much. Maybe keeping you alive is a step towards stopping the madness. Her claws tapped the table as she considered his words. And what happens after? You hide me. And then what? Do you think this will end the war? He sighed. I don't know, but it's a start. Kalira's gaze softened slightly, though her voice remained steady. You're a fool, human, but perhaps that is what makes you dangerous. A faint smile tugged at Daniel's lips. I'll take that as a compliment. Before she could respond, an alarm blared through the outpost, red lights flashing in the cell. Daniel tensed, grabbing the device and motioning for her to move. That's not good. We need to leave. Now. Kalira hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. You may be a fool, Reyes, but I will not waste your efforts. Lead the way. As they slipped out of the cell and into the chaos, Kalira couldn't help but feel a strange mix of trust and uncertainty. For the first time, she wasn't just a captive, she was an ally. And together, they were walking into the unknown. The outpost buzzed with chaos. Red lights pulsed on the walls, casting flickering shadows as alarms wailed. Kalira and Daniel moved swiftly through the narrow corridors, their footsteps barely audible over the commotion. Daniel led the way, clutching a small datapad that displayed the layout of the base. Kalira followed close behind, her sharp eyes scanning for threats. What triggered the alarms? Kalira whispered, her voice low but urgent. Daniel didn't look back as he answered. Command, they're worried about a Drex retaliation strike. They think keeping you here makes us a target. Kalira's lips curled into a smirk. So they fear me. They don't understand you, Daniel corrected. Big difference. Kalira raised an eyebrow at his response but said nothing. Her instincts told her to remain wary, yet she couldn't ignore the human's determination to protect her. It was a strange feeling, one she wasn't sure she liked. As they reached a side exit, Daniel tapped a sequence into the datapad. The door slid open with a faint hiss, revealing the dark expanse of the jungle outside. The humid air rushed in, carrying the sounds of distant wildlife. This way, Daniel said, stepping into the night. The supply route's about a mile from here. Kalira hesitated for only a second before following him. The jungle was dense and alien, its glowing flora casting faint blue and green light. Each step felt heavier, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. She wasn't used to being vulnerable, to relying on someone else, especially a human. Do you always go against your orders like this? Kalira asked, her tone laced with curiosity. Not always, Daniel replied, glancing over his shoulder. But sometimes you have to trust your gut, even if it means breaking the rules. Kalira's tail flicked behind her as she considered his words. And what does your gut tell you about me? That you're not the enemy they think you are, Daniel said simply. Before Kalira could respond, a faint sound caught her attention. Movement in the underbrush. She stopped abruptly, her claws extending instinctively. We're not alone. Daniel froze, his hand dropping to the sidearm on his belt. Drex, or humans. Kalira sniffed the air, her sharp senses on high alert. Not Drex. Your kind. The underbrush rustled again, and the faint beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness. Voices followed, sharp and hurried. Search the perimeter. Don't let them escape. Daniel cursed under his breath. They're onto us. Come on. We need to move. They took off into the jungle, weaving through the thick vegetation. The voices grew louder, closer, as the search party pursued them. Kalira's heart raced, her warrior instincts kicking in. She grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him into a cluster of glowing ferns. "Quiet," she whispered, her voice firm. The search party passed within feet of their hiding spot, their flashlights cutting through the night. Kalira held her breath, her claws gripping Daniel's arm as they waited. When the humans finally moved on, she let out a soft exhale. "You're good at this," Daniel whispered. "I've been hunted before," she replied, a faint smirk crossing her lips. "You're lucky I'm here." As they continued toward the supply route, the faintest spark of trust flickered between them. Despite their differences, they were beginning to rely on each other, and Kalira couldn't deny that it felt right. The jungle grew quieter as Kalira and Daniel neared the hidden supply route. The air was thick with tension, and every sound, distant calls of alien wildlife, the rustling of leaves, seemed amplified. Despite her warrior instincts, Kalira found herself glancing at Daniel more often than she liked. His determination, even in the face of betrayal from his own kind, was unsettlingly admirable. They reached a clearing where an old transport vehicle was hidden under a canopy of glowing vines. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow, his voice low as he gestured to the vehicle. "This should get us far enough from the outpost. Once we're clear, we can figure out the next steps." Kalira stepped forward, her sharp gaze scanning their surroundings. "And what will you do, human? Your people will brand you a traitor for helping me." Daniel shrugged, his tone steady. "I've made peace with that. Someone has to take the first step, even if it costs them." Kalira paused, her claws lightly tapping against her thigh. "You risk everything for an enemy you barely know. Why?" Daniel met her gaze, his brown eyes unwavering. "Because you're not my enemy. Not really. This war isn't between you and me. It's between people who are too stubborn to see the bigger picture. If I can make a difference, even a small one, it's worth it." Before Kalira could respond, the faint hum of approaching engines shattered the quiet. Her ears twitched, and she turned toward the sound. "Your people are close. They've tracked us." Daniel cursed, quickly moving to the transport. "Get in. We don't have much time." Kalira hesitated for a split second before climbing into the vehicle. Daniel started the engine, the old machine sputtering to life before roaring forward. The jungle blurred around them as they sped down the overgrown path, but the hum of their pursuers grew louder. "They won't stop," Kalira said, her voice calm but firm. "You should leave me. It's me they want." Daniel shot her a sharp look. "Not a chance. We're in this together." The word sent a strange warmth through Kalira, one she quickly pushed aside. She scanned their surroundings, her sharp eyes spotting a narrow canyon up ahead. "Take that path. It's too tight for their vehicles to follow." Daniel veered sharply, the transport skidding into the canyon. The walls rose high on either side, blocking out the glow of the jungle. The pursuing engines faded, their pursuers unable to navigate the narrow route. They stopped at a safe distance, the vehicle's engine ticking as it cooled. Daniel leaned back, exhaling in relief. That was close. Kalira stepped out, her tail swishing as she surveyed the canyon. "You're a fool, Reyes, but a brave one." Daniel chuckled, leaning against the transport. "I'll take that as a compliment." She turned to him, her gaze softer than before. "You've proven yourself more than I expected, human. Perhaps this war does not need to end in blood." Daniel nodded. "One step at a time." For the first time, Kalira allowed herself to believe that peace, however distant, might be possible. Together, they were more than enemies. They were a chance at something better.